The morning frost hung heavy over the Belgian countryside that December day in 1944, the 17th to be exact, when that jeep came rolling up to the checkpoint just outside a little place called Uweiler. Sergeant William Creel stood there in the bitter cold, watching his breath turn to vapour, one hand raised to halt the vehicle. Inside sat 3 men wearing what looked like perfectly good American uniforms, carrying weapons that seemed regulation enough, speaking English that almost sounded right if you didn't listen too carefully. But Creel had been warned about something that seemed impossible, something that went against every notion of how wars were supposed to be fought. Word had come down that German soldiers might actually be running around behind American lines dressed up like GIs, talking like Americans, trying to pass themselves off as the real thing. So when that jeep stopped, Creel asked for the password. The men inside hesitated, looking at each other. He asked again, more firmly this time. Their English started falling apart right there. Then Creel's eyes caught something that didn't fit, those Sten guns they were carrying, British weapons that no American patrol would ever have. Within a few minutes, all 3 were in custody, and when they stripped off those olive-drab uniforms, there was German field grey underneath. Unteroffizier Manfred Pernas, Oberfähnrich Günther Billing, and Gefreiter Wilhelm Schmidt had just become the most talked-about prisoners taken during what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. What nobody realised right then was how their capture would set off the most widespread case of paranoia the American military had ever seen, turning every single checkpoint into something like a quiz show, every conversation into a test of how American you really were, every soldier into somebody who might be a spy. The whole business of figuring out who was who got written not in codes or ciphers, but in baseball statistics, state capitals, and Hollywood gossip. The whole thing had started back on October 22nd of that year at the big man's headquarters in Rastenburg, way over in East Prussia. The Führer had summoned SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny to see him, and when Skorzeny arrived, he got handed a mission that would reshape how the final months of the war played out. Now Skorzeny wasn't just anybody. He already had quite a reputation as one of Germany's most feared commandos. Back in September of 43, he'd led that glider assault that rescued Mussolini from his mountain prison up at Gran Sasso, actually managed to spirit Il Duce away in a little plane that barely cleared the rocky plateau. Then in October of 44, he'd pulled off the kidnapping of Miklos Horthy Jr., which forced Hungary's regent to step down and kept that country in the war. But this new assignment was going to be his most audacious yet. The plan called for German forces to launch this massive counteroffensive right through the Ardennes forest, driving hard toward the crucial port at Antwerp. The whole idea was to split the American and British armies apart, recreating that stunning victory from May of 1940, when German panzers had reached the English Channel in just days. But this time around, everything depended on speed. The Germans absolutely had to capture at least one bridge over the Meuse River intact before Allied engineers could blow it to pieces. That's where Skorzeny came in. He would form up a special brigade, they'd call it Panzer Brigade 150, and its whole purpose would be seizing those bridges before anybody could destroy them. Then the big man told him something that made even this hardened commando pause for a moment. The best way to accomplish this, he said, with fewer losses and more speed, would be for Skorzeny and his men to wear American and British uniforms. Small units disguised in enemy clothing could cause tremendous confusion, the reasoning went, completely upset communications, misdirect troops all over the place, spread panic wherever they went. Skorzeny listened to all this, understanding immediately what it meant under international law. The Hague Convention from 1907 was crystal clear about this sort of thing. Soldiers who got captured while wearing enemy uniforms forfeited their rights as prisoners of war and could be executed as spies. This possibility led to extensive discussions with General Oberst Alfred Jodl and Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, but Skorzeny was assured the tactic was perfectly legitimate as long as his men took off the Allied uniforms before they actually got into any fighting. Within just a few days, Skorzeny had his plans submitted to Jodl. He put in a request for 3,300 men who knew English and understood American dialect. On October 25th, the High Command issued an order to every headquarters on the Western Front asking for English-speaking volunteers for secret commando operations. The order went out signed by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel himself, requesting soldiers with fluency in the English language and knowledge of American idiom. Skorzeny knew perfectly well this broadcast request would reach Allied intelligence within days. He actually asked permission to cancel the whole operation because of it, but the request got denied. Sure enough, the Allies intercepted that order on November 30th, but intelligence officers dismissed it as some kind of deception, unable to believe the Germans would actually be that brazen about the whole thing. Volunteers started arriving from all branches of the German military, most of them having absolutely no idea what they'd actually signed up for. Take Fritz Christ, 21 years old, a Luftwaffe private who'd been trained as an English translator. He thought he'd be interrogating American prisoners somewhere far from any combat. Instead, he found himself stuck behind barbed wire at the training camp they'd set up at Grafenwöhr in eastern Bavaria. Security was extreme. One man actually got shot when his letter home contained too much information. The volunteers only discovered what their actual mission was after they'd already arrived. The reality of what Skorzeny actually had to work with would have been funny if the stakes weren't so incredibly high. Out of the 2,500 men they eventually managed to assemble, only 10 of them spoke perfect English with any real knowledge of American idioms. Another 30 or 40 spoke English well enough but had no understanding whatsoever of American slang. Between 120 and 150 spoke English at some basic level. The rest had only school-level English, barely able to manage more than yes or no. Skorzeny wrote later that after a couple of weeks the result was absolutely terrifying. Those with minimal English got instructed to just exclaim, "sorry," if any Americans approached them, then open their trousers and hurry off pretending they had diarrhea. The equipment situation proved equally desperate. The Western Command got asked to procure 15 Sherman tanks, 20 armoured cars, 20 self-propelled guns, 100 jeeps, 40 motorcycles, 120 trucks, and enough British and American uniforms to go around. What actually got delivered fell catastrophically short of what they needed. Only 2 Sherman tanks arrived, both in poor condition, with one breaking down almost immediately. Instead of the requested American armour, Skorzeny received 5 Panther tanks, 6 armoured cars, 6 armoured personnel carriers, and 5 Sturmgeschütz assault guns, all German equipment. They disguised the Panthers with sheet metal cladding, olive drab paint, and white star insignia, but Skorzeny himself admitted they would only fool very young American troops seeing them from very far away at night. The uniform situation was even worse. Many turned out to be British, Polish, or Russian uniforms. Some were summer issue, despite the fact they were planning a December offensive. Others bore bloodstains or POW markings. Units all across Germany, confused by the request, just sent whatever they could find lying around. The brigade got flooded with Polish and Russian equipment from units that had no understanding whatsoever of what the operation was actually about. Skorzeny managed to acquire enough authentic American uniforms and weapons for only the commando teams, the best English speakers who got formed into a special unit they designated Einheit Stielau, named after SS Captain Ernst Stielau, who would lead them. These teams received intensive training despite how compressed the timeline was. They studied everything about the organization of the American Army, learning badges of rank, military customs, drill procedures. Some got sent to POW camps at Küstrin and Limburg to practice their English with actual captured American soldiers. They watched American movies to perfect their accents and learn current slang. They memorized American brand names, sports teams, popular songs, Hollywood stars. The commandos practiced walking like Americans, smoking like Americans, even chewing gum like Americans. The missions got divided into 3 categories. Demolition squads of 5 or 6 men would destroy bridges, ammunition dumps, fuel stores. Reconnaissance patrols of 3 or 4 men would scout both sides of the Meuse River, passing on false orders to American units they encountered, reversing road signs, removing minefield warnings, cordoning off roads with warnings of mines that didn't exist. Lead commando units would work with the attacking German forces, cutting telephone wires, destroying radio stations, issuing false orders. Every one of these commandos knew the risks they were taking. If they got captured in American uniform, execution was virtually certain. But there was another danger too. In all the chaos of battle, they might get shot by their own side if German troops mistook them for actual Americans. For identification purposes, they'd use specific signals. Vehicles would display a small yellow triangle. Tanks would maintain specific gun positions. Soldiers would wear coloured scarves beneath their uniforms. On December 14th, Panzer Brigade 150 assembled near Bad Münstereifel. On the afternoon of December 16th, they moved out, advancing behind 3 attacking panzer divisions. The plan called for Skorzeny's disguised forces to move around the spearhead divisions once they reached the high fens, then race ahead to grab those Meuse bridges. The entire operation depended on the rapid advance of the 1st SS Panzer Division commanded by Joachim Peiper. If Peiper's armoured spearhead broke through quickly enough, Skorzeny's disguised troops could slip through in all the confusion and reach the bridges before American engineers destroyed them. December 16, 1944 began before dawn broke. Through the dark forests of the Ardennes, more than 200,000 German troops launched what would be the big man's last great offensive in the West. That initial assault achieved complete surprise. American forces, spread thin across an 80-mile front, suddenly faced overwhelming numbers. 4 divisions, either inexperienced or battle-weary, confronted 30 German divisions supported by nearly 1,000 tanks. The German artillery barrage shattered that frozen morning. Searchlights bounced off low clouds to illuminate the battlefield. Infantry advanced through snow-covered forests. Panzers rumbled forward on those narrow roads. For the first few hours, everything proceeded exactly according to plan. The Einheit-Stielau teams infiltrated during all the confusion. Dressed in American uniforms, driving captured jeeps, they slipped right through the chaos of the American withdrawal. One team actually drove directly into a town the Americans still held, scouted all the defences, then on their way out redirected an entire American convoy of armour and supplies to the wrong road. 2 other teams successfully misdirected Allied convoys, adding to the general confusion everywhere. They cut telephone wires, removed road signs, spread false rumours of German breakthroughs deeper than the actual penetrations. But on December 17th, reality destroyed any prospects the operation had. The 1st SS Panzer Division failed to reach its objectives on schedule. Fierce American resistance at Elsenborn Ridge denied the Germans access to the northern roads they desperately needed. At St. Vith, American defenders fought with ferocity, delaying the German timetable significantly. The rapid breakthrough that Operation Greif required simply never materialized. Skorzeny realized that same day his mission's original aims were completely doomed. He attended a staff conference at 6th Panzer Army headquarters and suggested his brigade be used as a conventional unit instead. The request got approved. Panzer Brigade 150 got ordered to assemble south of Malmedy and report to the 1st SS Panzer Division. But those commando teams were already behind American lines. Some successfully completed their missions. Others got captured when they failed password challenges, when nervous American soldiers noticed British weapons or German boots, when their English failed them under pressure, when they couldn't answer simple questions about American culture. The capture near Eiweil on December 17th of Pernas, Billing and Schmidt created the panic that would define the operation's real impact. During interrogation, Schmidt made a statement that absolutely electrified Allied intelligence. He claimed their mission was part of some larger operation to infiltrate Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force and either capture or kill General Dwight Eisenhower himself. Whether Schmidt actually believed this rumour or was deliberately spreading disinformation remains unclear to this day. No evidence has ever confirmed such a plan actually existed. The real mission was capturing bridges over the Meuse River. But that statement had immediate consequences. Within hours, security around Eisenhower got dramatically increased. The Supreme Commander found himself virtually imprisoned in his own headquarters at Versailles, surrounded by guards who checked everyone entering the building. Eisenhower was reportedly furious about the confinement, especially when it extended right through Christmas. After several days of this, he angrily declared he had to get out and didn't care if anyone tried to kill him. But the paranoia spread far beyond just protecting Eisenhower. Allied forces, already reeling from the German offensive, now saw potential infiltrators absolutely everywhere. Checkpoints appeared throughout the Allied rear areas, greatly slowing the movement of troops and supplies. American military policemen began interrogating every single soldier passing through, using questions designed to identify Germans who were posing as Americans. What's the capital of Illinois? Who won the World Series in 1940? Who's Mickey Mouse's girlfriend? What team plays at Wrigley Field? Who's married to Betty Grable? Where does the guard stand in a football formation? Who's Frank Sinatra? What's the name of the president's dog? The questions ranged all over the place, from state geography to baseball statistics, to Hollywood gossip, to American slang. MPs improvised constantly, creating new questions based on whatever American trivia they could think of at the moment. The system was completely chaotic and often absolutely absurd. Many genuine American soldiers couldn't answer the questions. Regional differences meant soldiers from one part of America had no knowledge whatsoever of details from other regions. Educational differences meant some Americans had never learned state capitals or followed baseball. The checkpoints created numerous problems all over the place. General Omar Bradley got detained when he correctly identified Springfield as the capital of Illinois, but the MP checking him believed it was Chicago and held him until they could verify his identity. Brigadier General Bruce Clark got held at gunpoint after incorrectly stating the Chicago Cubs played in the American League. A captain spent an entire week in detention after getting caught wearing German boots he'd taken as souvenirs. British soldiers faced particular difficulties with the whole system. When reconnaissance officer David Niven encountered a guard demanding to know who won the 1940 World Series, he could only reply he hadn't the faintest idea. British troops who couldn't answer questions about American sports or geography got detained until their identities could be verified through other means. Some American soldiers gave deliberately wrong answers just to protest these absurd interrogations, which resulted in their own detention. Others became angry at being questioned by junior enlisted men, creating confrontations that further slowed everything down. The paranoia affected military operations significantly. Troop movements that should have taken hours required days as every vehicle got stopped and every occupant questioned. Supply convoys sat idle at checkpoints while drivers attempted to prove their American identity. Units rushing to reinforce threatened sectors got delayed by repeated interrogations. Commanders found their orders questioned by subordinates who suspected everyone might be a German infiltrator. The psychological impact on the German infiltrators themselves was severe. Those still behind American lines found themselves unable to move freely anywhere. The cultural questions exposed all the inadequacies in their preparation. They'd studied military procedures, learned rank insignia, memorized American Army organization, but they hadn't anticipated interrogations about baseball statistics or Hollywood marriages or regional slang. Some infiltrators attempted to avoid checkpoints entirely, traveling cross-country or through forests. This just made them more conspicuous to American patrols. Others tried to bluff their way through checkpoints, offering excuses for why they couldn't answer questions. Very few succeeded. Between December 16th and December 31st, American forces captured 23 members of Operation Greif. 16 got captured in December of 44. The team leader, Gunther Schultz, got captured later and tried in May of 45. Each captured infiltrator faced a military trial. The legal situation was absolutely clear under international law. Article 23 of the Hague Convention concerning land warfare specifically forbade improper use of enemy military insignia and uniform. Soldiers captured wearing enemy uniforms while conducting military operations could be tried as spies rather than treated as prisoners of war. The first trial began at Henri-Chapelle on December 21st. Pernas, Billing and Schmidt faced charges of violating the laws of war by wearing American uniforms while conducting military operations. The evidence was completely overwhelming. They'd been captured in American uniforms with American weapons, carrying American identification, but wearing German field grey underneath it all. The trial was swift. All three got convicted and sentenced to death by firing squad. On December 23, 1944, 2 days before Christmas, the sentences got carried out. American military police led the three Germans to the execution site. Captain J. Iser of the 633rd Medical Clearing Station pinned white paper targets over their hearts. Schmidt's glasses got removed. The prisoners got blindfolded. Military police formed up the firing squad. Billing shouted, "Long live our Führer Adolf," at the moment of execution. The rifles fired. All three men died instantly. Their bodies got cut down, carried away, and buried. Eventually, they'd be interred at the German military cemetery at Lommel in Belgium, where they rest today alongside more than 39,000 other German war dead. 13 additional Operation Greif participants got tried and executed at either Henri-Chapelle or Huy between December 21st and December 31st. Each one faced a firing squad. Each execution followed a military trial. Each trial found the defendants guilty of violating the Hague Convention. Each sentence got reviewed and approved by senior commanders. The executions got carried out with military precision, without malice but without mercy either. Team leader Günther Schultz got tried by military commission in May of 45 and executed near Braunschweig on June 14th. Why his trial got delayed until after Germany's surrender remains unclear. Who actually ordered his execution carried out also remains uncertain. The United States Ninth Army carried out the sentence. In total, 17 Operation Greif participants got executed for wearing enemy uniforms. The operation's tactical accomplishments were minimal at best. No bridges got captured. No major demolitions succeeded. No critical communications got permanently disrupted. A few road signs got reversed. Some telephone lines got cut. Several American units received false orders, though most got quickly corrected. But the psychological impact vastly exceeded any tactical results by a huge margin. For weeks afterward, American forces operated under the assumption that German infiltrators might be absolutely anywhere. The paranoia affected decision-making at every single level. Eisenhower's confinement meant the Supreme Commander got isolated from direct observation of battlefield conditions during the critical opening phase of the offensive. The checkpoint delays slowed down the American response to the German penetration significantly. Units that should have reached threatened sectors in hours took days to actually arrive. The widespread suspicion degraded unit cohesion everywhere. American soldiers who should have been focused on fighting Germans to their front instead worried about possible Germans among them. The Battle of the Bulge itself proceeded independent of Operation Greif's failure. German forces drove deep into American lines, creating that bulge that gave the battle its name. At Bastogne, American defenders held out despite being completely surrounded. On December 22nd, when German officers delivered a surrender ultimatum, Acting Commander Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe responded with a single typed word that became legendary. To the German commander, nuts, the American commander. When the confused German officers asked what it meant, they got told it was the same as go to hell. The 101st Airborne held Bastogne until they got relieved by Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army on December 26th. Patton's forces had executed a remarkable 90-degree turn, driving north to break the siege. By early January, Allied counterattacks had eliminated the bulge and restored the front lines. The battle lasted from December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945. More than 1 million men participated, making it the largest battle fought by the United States Army outside the Civil War. American casualties exceeded 80,000, including 19,000 killed and 23,000 captured. German casualties were similar, but Germany couldn't replace those losses. The battle marked the end of Germany's ability to conduct offensive operations in the West. The big man had gambled everything on the Ardennes offensive and lost it all. For Otto Skorzeny, Operation Greif was over by December 17th, when Panzer Brigade 150 converted to conventional operations. On December 21st, the brigade attempted to capture Malmedy but got repulsed after several assaults. Skorzeny got wounded by artillery shrapnel near Ligneville. He recovered and continued serving until Germany's surrender. In May of 45, Skorzeny surrendered to the 30th Infantry Regiment. He spent 2 years in custody awaiting trial. At the Dachau trials in 1947, Skorzeny and 9 officers of Panzer Brigade 150 faced charges of improperly using American uniforms by entering combat disguised as enemy soldiers. They also got charged with wrongfully obtaining American uniforms and Red Cross parcels from POW camps. Skorzeny's defense rested on one crucial distinction. His men had been ordered to remove American uniforms before engaging in any actual combat. The disguises were for infiltration and deception, not for fighting. A surprise defense witness proved decisive in the proceedings. FFE Yeo Thomas, a former British Special Operations executive agent, testified that Allied forces had used identical tactics themselves. He'd personally worn German uniforms behind enemy lines during missions in France. The military tribunal drew a clear distinction between using enemy uniforms during combat and using them for deception purposes. It couldn't be proven that Skorzeny had ordered his men to fight while wearing American uniforms. The tribunal acquitted all defendants. The verdict was controversial, to say the least. 17 of Skorzeny's men had been executed for the same actions for which he got acquitted. The difference appeared to be timing and available evidence. The men executed back in December of 44 had been captured actually wearing American uniforms. Skorzeny, tried in 47, could demonstrate his orders prohibited combat while disguised. The trial established important precedents regarding the laws of war. Using enemy uniforms for deception got ruled a legitimate ruse de guerre, provided combatants removed the disguises before engaging in combat. This distinction would influence interpretation of international law for decades to come. Skorzeny didn't remain in custody very long after that. In 1948, he escaped from an internment camp in Darmstadt. Former SS officers disguised as American military police facilitated his escape. Some historians speculate American intelligence may have tacitly allowed or even assisted the escape, though no evidence confirms this theory. Skorzeny spent time hiding on a Bavarian farm, then in Salzburg and Paris, eventually settling in Spain. He worked as a military advisor to Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser for a while. Skorzeny died of cancer on July 5, 1975, in Madrid at age 65. He never expressed any regret whatsoever for Operation Greif or any other wartime actions. The checkpoint interrogations became part of American military folklore for years afterward. Those questions about baseball and Hollywood, state capitals and movie stars became symbols of how cultural identity served as a security tool during that crisis. The improvised system, however chaotic it was, proved effective at exposing infiltrators whose language training couldn't replicate the casual cultural knowledge that Americans absorbed naturally from childhood. Being American involved more than just speaking English or wearing the right uniform. It involved shared cultural experiences, common references, collective memories that couldn't be adequately taught to foreigners in weeks of training. This cultural cohesion, often taken completely for granted, proved to be a national security asset when tested by enemy infiltrators. The 17 men executed for Operation Greif are remembered today primarily through military cemeteries and historical accounts. Their graves at Lommel get maintained with the same care as those of soldiers who died in conventional combat. The cemetery makes absolutely no distinction between those executed as spies and those killed in battle. All are German war dead. Nothing more, nothing less. Manfred Pernas was 23 years old at execution. Gunther Billing, 21, remained a convinced Nazi right to his final moment. Wilhelm Schmidt, 24, faced death with quiet resignation. Each one was someone's son, perhaps someone's brother. Each had made choices that led to that frozen morning in Belgium, to those posts, to those blindfolds, to those rifles pointing at their hearts. Operation Greif's legacy extended well beyond its tactical failure. The operation demonstrated conclusively that special operations cannot compensate for conventional military failure. Skorzony's infiltrators couldn't capture bridges if Peiper's panzers never reached them in the first place. No amount of deception and confusion could substitute for the breakthrough that never actually occurred. Yet the operation succeeded in creating disruption, far exceeding what the actual infiltrators accomplished on the ground. The mere possibility of infiltration created panic affecting hundreds of thousands of soldiers. This gap between perception and reality became a key lesson in modern strategic thinking about psychological warfare. The Battle of the Bulge ended in late January of 1945. Allied forces resumed their advance toward Germany proper. Within 4 months, the Third Reich collapsed completely. The big man committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. The 17 executed Operation Greif participants were already in their graves by then. Their war ended violently on Belgian soil, far from home. Their operation had failed in its tactical objectives, but succeeded in creating confusion and fear that hampered Allied operations during the critical opening phase of the battle. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, speaking to Parliament on January 18, 1945, while the battle still raged, declared it undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war, and will, I believe, be regarded as an ever-famous American victory. Churchill explicitly noted that Americans had engaged 30 to 40 men for every British soldier engaged, emphasizing that this was fundamentally an American battle and an American victory. The checkpoint guards who asked about baseball didn't know they were creating folklore that would last for generations. They were just solving an immediate problem, improvising security measures to identify potential enemies in their midst. Their solution worked precisely because it was rooted in genuine shared culture. Americans knew about baseball and Hollywood and state capitals because they grew up American, absorbing that knowledge naturally through everyday life. Germans trying to impersonate Americans could study facts all they wanted, but couldn't replicate that natural cultural fluency no matter how hard they tried. This distinction between learned facts and absorbed culture proved absolutely decisive in identifying infiltrators. The German failure demonstrated a principle that remains relevant even today. Cultural knowledge absorbed through lived experience over years cannot be quickly taught to adults from different backgrounds, no matter how intensive the training. Modern special operations forces have learned from Operation Greif's mixed results. Intelligence services now spend years preparing deep cover agents precisely because cultural fluency cannot be quickly taught in any classroom. Language training, factual knowledge, and behavioral coaching are all necessary but completely insufficient on their own. Genuine cultural fluency requires immersion and time, period. The fundamental challenge persists across decades and even centuries. Culture gets absorbed through experience, not taught in classrooms with textbooks and lectures. Operation Greif demonstrated both the potential and the severe limits of special operations in warfare. Small units conducting unconventional operations can create disruption far beyond their actual numbers. The psychological impact can exceed tactical results by orders of magnitude in the right circumstances. But without conventional military success providing the necessary conditions, Special operations cannot achieve strategic objectives no matter how well executed. Deception cannot substitute for actual victory on the battlefield. For historians and military strategists studying the war, Operation Greif remains a compelling case study even all these years later. It exemplifies how ambitious planning disconnected from realistic assessment of capabilities inevitably leads to failure. The big man's late war decision-making followed this pattern consistently. Grandiose in conception, inadequate in resources, divorced from operational reality. Yet the operation's unintended success in creating widespread panic validated the concept that psychological warfare and deception can be genuine force multipliers when properly employed. The 17 men who died before firing squads for wearing enemy uniforms would be largely forgotten today, if not for the historical record that preserves their stories. They weren't particularly important men in the grand scheme of things. They accomplished very little before their capture. Their operation failed comprehensively in every measurable way. Yet their executions marked an important moment in military and legal history, clarifying the application of international law regarding the use of enemy uniforms in warfare. The legacy lives on in the lessons their operation taught to subsequent generations. Identity verification remains absolutely crucial for security in any conflict. Cultural knowledge remains extraordinarily difficult for outsiders to fake quickly and convincingly. Special operations remain valuable tools, but cannot substitute for conventional military success at the strategic level. The laws of war remain important, but remain subject to interpretation based on specific circumstances and available evidence. The human cost of war extends beyond those killed in combat to include those executed after capture for violations of the laws of war. Each execution represented a human being, with family and history and potential, ended by bullets fired on legal authority after proper trial and conviction. The graves at Lommelmark lives cut short by war and its brutal logic, the inexorable mathematics of conflict. The checkpoint guards who asked about baseball were American soldiers who followed their orders, who did their duty, and who carried psychological burdens from executing prisoners, even enemies convicted of espionage under military law. Operation Greif failed to capture a single bridge across the Meuse. It caused no major destruction of strategic value. It killed relatively few Americans directly through combat action, but the fear it created delayed reinforcements significantly, disrupted command decisions at multiple levels, and consumed resources during critical days when every hour mattered. The indirect impact, impossible to quantify precisely even today, shaped the battle's opening phase in ways that extended far beyond what the infiltrators themselves accomplished. The infiltrators getting caught, tried, and executed within days demonstrated American military justice operating under intense wartime pressure. The speed from capture to execution reflected combat conditions and established important precedent, though modern standards would absolutely require more deliberate proceedings with additional safeguards. The Battle of the Bulge ground on for 5 more brutal weeks after the infiltrators got executed, ultimately resulting in German defeat and the complete elimination of Germany's strategic reserve in the West. The story of Operation Greif and the Battle of the Bulge reminds us even today that warfare encompasses far more than just battlefield operations and tactical maneuvers. Psychological impact, cultural factors, and perception often matter just as much as actual tactical results in determining strategic outcomes. A failed operation that creates widespread panic may achieve more strategic disruption than a successful operation that remains completely undetected by the enemy. The checkpoint interrogations, absurd as they sometimes seemed to participants, worked effectively because they tested knowledge that genuine Americans possessed naturally through lived experience, while infiltrators couldn't replicate it despite extensive training and preparation. The American soldiers who fought in the Battle of the Bulge faced not only a powerful enemy offensive launched with overwhelming force, but also the psychological burden of suspecting that enemies might be absolutely anywhere, wearing any uniform, speaking any language, impossible to distinguish from genuine friendlies. This erosion of certainty marked a genuinely new dimension in warfare that would influence military operations and security procedures for generations to come, echoing down through the decades into modern counterinsurgency and asymmetric warfare. The lessons learned in those frozen Belgian forests about identity, culture, deception, and psychological warfare remain relevant to military planners and intelligence professionals even in our contemporary world, a testament to how that desperate German gambit, though it failed tactically, succeeded in reshaping how we think about warfare itself.